Hello, everyone, and welcome to another show of Hot Topics with Greg Ochs. As many of you probably have viewed the last show that we got talking about, and the title of the show is How Well Do You Really Know What Your Kids Are Doing? And we had a very good discussion. Far to my right is Kathy Bystrom, and she's Community Health Outreach Services. I have Ashley Lavelle, who is a detective for the Forest Lake Police Department and deals with all the kids all the time in programs. And then I have Matt Howard, who is the Youth Community Justice Manager at the Youth Service Bureau. Is that correct?
That's close enough.
There you go. All right. Well, what I wanted to do is start off and kind of give an overview of our last show, have each one of you kind of talk a little bit about what we did. Then we're going to get into some nuts and bolts and start getting into some interesting topics on consumption and things of that nature. Kathy, why don't you start off and give us an overview of last meeting?
Well, I think in general we kind of covered the importance of parent involvement in youth drug and alcohol prevention. Talked a lot about the efforts of the Most FL Drug-Free Communities Coalition as we're working to prevent and reduce youth drug abuse in the community, use and abuse actually in the community. And we talked about a lot of the health implications of youth use, specifically the negative implications on the developing brain. And all of those things I think are really important in setting the stage today as we discuss specific substances and their impact on young people in our community.
Ashley, why don't you give us an overview?
Well, just in addition to what Kathy said, I talked a little bit about how police respond with juveniles when they are caught in possession or using marijuana and maybe other types of drugs or alcohol. And we got a little bit into the perception and how important that is in our Most FL Community Coalition, and a little bit about mental health and how that kind of corresponds with substance use and abuse by juveniles.
Matt, you can give us an overview.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, I gave some of the perspective on what happens in the diversion process when the kids do get in trouble, they get cited, and then how that works going up to the county attorney's office and then routed to the Youth Service Bureau and for education, and some of the things that we do with them there and with the kids and their parents, and then ditto to what they said.
Okay, sounds good. All right, now let's get into the actual drugs. We really didn't get into all of the drugs that are available, the variety, what they do and what they can do, and how bad they are for you, and all this. I think probably the number one would be alcohol. I think that probably unanimously agreed on that. And when the system starts, it's usually after they've purchased it. And then, Ashley, you guys get involved with it. Then Matt may get involved with it, and Kathy then might be right on your heels, or vice versa. But the number of times that you pick up a youth that are inebriated, what normal condition? What's the alcohol level that they have to, if you have them take a breathalyzer test, at what level do you fail?
Well, with anybody under the age of 21, you fail if the preliminary breath test registers anything greater than a 0.0. So even if a youth were to take a sip of alcohol and it registered on the preliminary breath test, that would mean that they had been drinking alcohol. So unfortunately for them, anything that registers above a 0.0 would mean that they were consuming.
That they be consuming.
Yes.
At what point in time then, Kathy, do you have been to the schools, you have been to the various agencies that you're involved with, giving educational level. do the youth understand that there's zero tolerance?
Well, I'm not sure that they understand that there's zero tolerance until maybe they get into trouble.
Okay.
I think the innate nature of young people is that they take risks. And when they perceive that their peers are using and the opportunity presents itself to use, it can be difficult for them to resist that if they haven't had the opportunity to have those conversations or practice those skills. And so, I don't think that they, I don't think the intent is there. I just think that they oftentimes, succumb to that pressure and that opportunity, when it presents itself. I think with alcohol, the data really shows that they do understand the risks. I would say that the perception of risk and harm with alcohol is higher than it is with marijuana. And certainly with a lot of other substances. So I think the bulk of the kids perceive there are some risks involved, but sometimes, as we talked about in the last session, that regulatory part of the brain, which is the front of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, is pretty quiet, during adolescence. And sometimes the judgment isn't there to make those healthier decisions. And so it's the role of the adults, and particularly their parents, to be that prefrontal cortex, to be, educating their kids, monitoring their kids, and making sure that they understand the consequences of alcohol use.
I think alcohol is number one on the use list because it's so accessible.
Yeah, I was just going to come to that. Fine.
Yeah, and so everything that Kathy said is so true. But so you've got the teenagers that are at a party or a hangout, and they are higher risk takers. And what's the most available chemical, maybe besides tobacco and caffeine, in our culture? And it's alcohol. And so it's in the fridge, it's in the cabinets, it's in the garage, it's in the shop. It's a very common part of our culture. And so when there's that much access to it, I think that's what moves alcohol to the top of the use list.
Convenience.
Yeah.
Very much so, convenience. It after they, first of all, I guess I would like to go back and once again reiterate that for all practical purposes, I'm very proud of the parents of Forest Lake and what they are accomplishing and what they have done. And I think if you look at the boards that we have behind here, under no way do I want the parents to think I'm chastising them. What I'm trying to do is with this show is to make everybody aware that you're not aware enough, no matter what. You can't ever be overly prepared. And with that being said, and I can relate to, I relate a lot of times to my own upbringing. I mean, my dad had a refrigerator in the garage and it was full of beer, and everywhere we went, all my uncles, I mean all the relatives, no matter what, it was there. And, and you'd kind of look around and then you'd grab one, run around the side of the house and open it, you sit back and you're thinking, man, how it has changed so much, because we never looked at it as a big issue. And my parents never looked at it as a big issue. And I think I shared that when I went hunting with my dad, we went deer hunting at nighttime. Well, if you want a beer, go ahead. You're not driving anywhere. You're not going anywhere. And, so I mean, I think it was more socially accepted for youth drinking. Not saying it was right, but on the same plateau, there was not much discussion about it. It was just there, Well,
if I could just, kind of jump in here, Greg, I think we've learned a lot. You and I are probably fairly close in age, and I think we've learned a lot over the years. with all of the research and the imaging opportunities to take a look at the brain under various imaging, types of imaging to see the impact of those substances on the brain. And, we certainly, many years ago, thought kids were fully mature by 16, 18 years old. And we've learned since then that they're not. So I think we've kind of changed a little bit, changed our ideas around, how acceptable it is from a health perspective for young people to be using substances, whether it's alcohol or tobacco or, other drugs.
Yeah, and learning about the age of first use of the drugs, whether it's alcohol or any other drug, the younger you are, the more likely you are to become addicted. And so someone starting at the age of, say, 14 and younger, for most drug categories, it's almost a 50% addiction rate. Whereas
Really?
like with alcohol,
That's alarming.
yeah,
I mean, that is alarming.
with alcohol, the general population is about 1 out of every 9 or 10 people becomes addicted to alcohol that uses it regularly. But when you look at that compared to a kid that starts at age 14 being 1 out of 2 rate for addiction, that's a totally different health and societal cost picture. And so we've learned that in the last 10, 15 years.
Now, when a child, I'm going to call him a child because you go to what age, 18? Yeah, okay. So they're a child, and what have you found in the research that you guys have been involved with talking with the people? At what point in time did parents admit that their child had a problem, or when do the kids? I would imagine you get them to the point with you that they're pretty probably scared and more willing to kind of talk in front of you maybe than they are to their own parents. What have you found that is generally the age bracket that once the line is crossed and they're starting to develop habits that then start to become of proportion, monstrous proportion?
It's different for every single youth because it depends on when they first started using, how much they're using, and so it's really a case-by-case basis. But if I was going to try to take a snapshot of a typical Forest Lake area youth, and say it was a 16-year-old that's been maybe drinking or using marijuana on a weekly basis, so maybe every Friday night, their chances for addiction are around 1 out of 7. So 1 out of 7 of those kids will develop a problem with it. But they won't likely know they have a problem with it until they're much older, because it's really hard to look at a teenager who's so physically resilient, they can bounce back from being poisoned much faster than you or I could. It's hard for the kids to exhibit the symptoms of addiction that can be really looked at, and you can point at it and say, yeah, I think that they have a problem. So it's tough to just look at it and be able to make a statement about it, because it really is different for each youth.
And I would add that there are sort of a general set of criteria or qualities or characteristics that parents can kind of pay attention to when they have concerns about their kids.
Yeah.
And perhaps we can add that via a slide at the end of the show. It's a pretty long list. Or parents can visit a lot of drug and alcohol prevention websites and find out what that list of qualities might be for a young person who is kind of crossing that line a little bit and moving from kind of social, maybe recreational type use into an abuse or dependence situation.
Yeah, Googling dependency and addiction criteria or abuse criteria will give people lists of 7 or 11 things where they can kind of check off if this is happening and if that's happening.
Right. Am I seeing this in my child? Am I seeing that in my child?
Yeah.
They can kind of go down that checklist, and then they will be able to make a determination if it has sort of crossed that line that you mentioned a little bit earlier.
And most parents, their gut feeling is usually the right one. They'll call me and they'll say, here's the situation. I know something isn't right. Can we get them into some kind of a program where they can start talking and figuring out if they need to go get a chemical dependency assessment? And we have the capability to do that. So usually when parents notice their behavior is changing, some of the simple things like grades are slipping, attendance at school is starting to slip, maybe there's some truancy issues, mood swings, sleeping too much or not enough are usually some telltale.
New sets of friends, friends can change. So it's
and lying.
Lying
is actually a really big indicator of use when there's too much or when there's abuse or dependency.
Violating family rules, that's another big one. Curfew rules, and those sorts of things.
Yeah, I had some friends that they ended up in. How they really knew there was a big issue with stealing.
Yeah,
because they always had a house that everybody just left their money all over the place, and all of a sudden somebody's missing a $20 bill or whatever, So
Right.
And then they started putting all the parts together and figured out what was going wrong. In the community, Ashley, when you ever run across many kids that are drinking while they're supposed to be in school, they've gotten out of school and gone into parking lots and cars and been drinking or driving around and drinking?
Not generally during school. We don't see a lot of that. I know that some of the school resource officers have, whether they got a tip from somebody or maybe a teacher had an interaction with a student that might have been drinking before school. It doesn't happen very often, but each one of the school resource officers has a PBT or preliminary breath test. That's where they blow into, and they have one of those at their schools. And of course, if they find out that someone was drinking, they'll have the person blow into that, and then they'll call the school, and usually they have some type of school consequence as well as most likely a citation referral to Youth Service Bureau.
And
so generally not driving around during the day.
What expanding on what the school does after it's gone, that yes, they determine a kid was drinking and then the school then re-notify you that you have to issue a citation? Or what's the law and what's the protocol? Like, let me rephrase it that way. I don't know. I don't think a lot of parents know that.
So generally the school resource officer will be there, and they can do the same thing. I mean, they're licensed police officers, so they can write the citation right there and talk to the parents. That's what we would do. Let's say a school resource officer was gone for the day and they had that issue at the school. We would call one of the patrol officers and have them come deal with it the same way that the school resource officer would. Contact the parents, get them picked up from school.
You would leave them at school while you're waiting for the parents, or would you take them down to the police station? Or
generally, the school resource officer has their own office at each school, so they would wait in their office until the parents came.
I see. And then after that, then Washington County would be notified?
Yes, yep. So the citation would get sent down to Washington County Attorney's Office, Juvenile Division, and then they would most likely, depending on if that was their first offense or second offense or anything like that, most likely it would get referred to Youth Service Bureau.
Now, how big of a geographical area do you cover?
Northern Washington County, from Marine on the St. Croix over to the north, or the north side of Hugo and up to Forest Lake, and then all of Chisago County and Columbus and Linwood, the little parts of Anoka County that the Forest Lake School District is in. So it's a pretty big catchment area.
Now, with that's a large geographical area.
Yeah.
That's very large. At the Youth Service, excuse me, at the Youth Service Bureau, how many people do you have on staff that do something similar to what you do?
It's kind of a tricky question because we have a enrichment staff person. But as far as the diversion work that gets done, it's really split between 3 people: the youth and family therapist, myself, and the community justice case manager. So 3 different people will tackle those different parts of that program.
Are these services provided to the public at no charge?
No, there are nominal fees. Those fees don't cover the cost, and so that's what we have to do our fundraising for. And so, yeah, we do contracts with the counties and cities. We get grants and foundations and private donations, and you can give us money if you'd like to, if you want to write me a check today.
I already have once.
All right.
One time only.
Hey, twice is good. Twice is good. But no, and so yeah, it is. It's a large area, and to give the viewers some sense of the Forest Lake area youth are at 50% of what we do. In all of Chisago County is the other 50%. And so just the Forest Lake area.
Really?
Yeah.
Now that's an interesting statistic.
Yeah.
That is.
So
That's very
so northern Washington County really does get the bulk of our time and services, per capita, I guess.
Well,
I can kind of weigh in a little bit on that. The difference with that could possibly be, well, number one, Forest Lake has a lot of retail here, and I know quite a bit of youth that get caught shoplifting. They have to go through the diversion program at Youth Service Bureau. So a lot of the retail here attracts more shoplifting and things like that.
don't even think about those things. That's
Yeah,
out of my mind.
and it also differs with law enforcement agencies. You know, if because we have a choice on how to handle a situation, it could be just handled differently amongst cities. You know, it could be consistent or not consistent or whatever, just because law enforcement officials have discretion. So depending on how they want to handle the situation that they're in with a juvenile, could really differ between cities.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Kathy, with all your programs, how big of an area do you get involved with? I'm very.
He's interested now.
I am, because I didn't realize that the boundaries were as big as they are.
Well, my current service area covers what we call the Fairview Lake service area, and that stretches from Hugo Lino, that southern border, north to Pine City area, and then from Highway 65 to the west and the St. Croix River to the east. So I'm working with multiple school districts typically on various initiatives, and then within the community as well, other programs and things that we have that are not youth specific, all throughout that service area.
So you office out of the hospital in Wyoming?
I actually office out of Chisago, out of the Fairview building in Chisago, because it's central to my service area.
I see.
That may be switching. We may be switching gears with that a little bit, however, because I was just notified that my service area is expanding considerably. So I'll be working in our Northland Hospital region too, which is out of Princeton area. So we'll be doing a lot of driving over the course of the next few years.
Here comes a new four-wheel drive SUV.
Yeah. But it's an exciting and wonderful new opportunity. So I'm looking forward to that.
Well, we've talked a little bit about alcohol. The one question is, how often are the youth able to get it from a liquor store? Is that a common thing?
So basically, the city of Forest Lake mandates that we do at least one alcohol compliance check for any business that has an alcohol license. So typically we do 2 checks every year per business. We're happy to say that in all of 2013 we didn't have any alcohol failures. So they're really doing a good job at checking people's IDs and making sure that they aren't selling. Yeah.
I said to Gail, I said, lean forward, I'm going to give you a kiss. This was marvelous.
Yeah, so, but that really doesn't stop the older siblings or the older friends or the older coworkers from giving access to the youth. So, so that's, I am part of all the compliance checks with our city, and we really are proud of our alcohol retailers.
How many establishments are there in Forest Lake? that you have to deal with?
20, I think as of today we have 24 licenses.
24. And that's not all of them. There's still more available, right?
That is just in Forest Lake, so that would be any off sale or any restaurant or anything like that.
Okay.
Youth tell us that the top 3 places that they get alcohol are home is number 1, followed closely by parties and peers. And then they also identify parents as a source of alcohol, and we're not quite sure what that means. Are parents providing that alcohol, or are they taking it from a parent's liquor cabinet, for example? And then the 5th place that they identify is getting someone to buy it for me. So I think we mentioned in the last show that all roads lead to adults typically. So even though they're getting it from peers or at parties, the people at those parties got it someplace, and typically from an adult in some way, shape, or form. Because, you know, we have a police department that's working tirelessly on reducing youth access among our liquor establishments, and really are kind of leaders in that area comparatively to other communities. We're really proud of that fact. But there is still an access issue. And again, that's another place where parents can be vigilant.
Well, and what I would say too to parents is that it's usually the young adults age 21, 22, 23 that are sticking around in the community, maybe don't have a lot going for them as far as job possibilities or school possibilities, that are kind of trying to get some identity by being providers to the high school age kids. I mean, they can be popular and at the parties and have a role to play by providing this, and it gives them some status. And so if you've got
Really?
yeah,
Really?
Oh, yeah.
and that's where they're getting it. It's those young adults that just don't have a lot going for them, and that's one way that they can really get some affirmation and feel good and be popular for a little while.
Okay. Okay, I
Very
guess,
true.
yeah. I can see that. I can understand. As you were mentioning, telling the story, I was sitting back thinking about the kids that I went to school with, and then afterwards, we all, everybody split up and went to different colleges, and then that was a free for all when we were in college. I mean, that was just unbelievable. But there were a few guys and gals that hung around, and and my younger brother. Now I'm sitting back going, a couple of them bought for my younger brother. Now that I'm remembering, so.
Yeah, so kind of parents can keep an eye out for your high school age kids that are mingling maybe with some of those kids that are a little bit recent grads and a little older.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
I would like to switch. I'd like to start getting into some real fun stuff to talk about. For example, number 1, let's start off with marijuana. I think that's probably the second product.
A hot topic.
Well, not only a hot topic, but it's probably number 2 in the eyes of the teens. First of all, what does it do to them the more times that they smoke marijuana? It's got to have some.
Take this.
It's got to have some consequences. So
I mean, it's not just good for them. It's not natural or
it's my
from the
age,
earth.
It's my age that says it's good for them.
Right.
We get for medical reasons.
Yeah. What does it do to the teenager that continues to use marijuana? It does a number of things. One thing that the kids usually don't know is that THC, the active ingredient that gets them high, is fat soluble. That means that it binds to fat. And you have a lot of fat in your brain. I always tell the kids, if someone calls you a fathead, just agree. I'm like, yeah, I am. Your brain is mostly made of fat, and so when the THC is binding to the fat, you're actually building up THC in the brain and surrounding the brain cells, the neurons that are trying to fire and talk to each other. One of the theories that is out there that has been proven to be true and has some weight behind it is that there's some physical interruption of electricity between the brain cells when the THC is actually swelling the fat linings around your brain cell. There's physical interruption of sending electricity back and forth. So the brain actually has to work harder to pass the same messages through. I mean, everybody knows that this is what marijuana does. It you know, kind of makes you dumber. People will say, oh, it makes you slower or dumber. Kind of the, hey man, how you doing? You know, get that thing in your voice, and you think slower, and you kind of go, That's the brain.
That was great. That was great.
Honestly, trying to pass messages, and it physically can't. It physically can't. It just takes longer. And so that's one of the effects that long-term marijuana use has, is that it really does physically slow down the brain and thought processes. There's many more, like affecting the ability to remember. Short-term memory is a very important key to learning. You can't learn if you can't remember. And so we talked about, I think last time, did we talk about the IQ drop?
Yeah, reduction of
Reduction of-
up to 8
If you
points.
didn't get to the last show, people that start as teenagers with marijuana, when they're tested with IQ then, and then when they're in their 30s, have an 8% IQ drop compared to sober folks all the way through. And that short-term memory, which most of it's located kind of in the side of your brain, in the mid to side part, gets affected by marijuana, and you can't form those memories as well, which means you can't learn as well, and diminishes your capacity. So it doesn't make you stupid overnight, doesn't make you magically ignorant, there's nothing that happens really quickly with marijuana. I kind of like to tell people it's the sloth of the drug world. It kind of slowly creeps in and camps out in the brain, and then once it's there, it's hard to leave. It's really slow. And it stays there, and it takes like 3 or 4 weeks if someone gets sober for that THC to leach out and to leave. And it's not like the other drugs where it's an hour per drink, right? That gets processed out of your system. It takes a joint or a bowl of marijuana probably 2 or 3 weeks to actually get out of the system, and so there's this buildup that happens, and it does plateau. You don't just keep building it up infinitely, but it builds up, decreases your immune system. Your white blood cells are all made up of fat, and so you'll get sick more often if you're smoking marijuana on a regular basis.
It's also strongly linked to mental illnesses, specifically schizophrenia and psychosis, as well as depression and anxiety.
That pretty well covers them all, Kathy.
Yeah. Exactly. That's why I think that's why we're so concerned. 1 in 6 kids who try marijuana will become addicted to it, and there are numerous studies. I think the last figure was about 120 or more that have actually shown a correlation between marijuana use and addiction to other substances as well. So this is not a benign chemical by any stretch of the imagination. And the concern for me, working in a healthcare system and caring about the health and well-being of our kids in our community, is the talk about all of the talk around the legalization issue.
I was going to bring that up.
Yeah, I mean, it really has decreased young people's perception, and I think adults as well, perception of risk and harm of this substance. And it is not a non-harmful substance. It is an addictive substance, and long-term use has major implications for health and well-being.
Yeah, and the potency of the marijuana today roughly is an average between 13 and 15% THC content, as opposed to the 60s when it was 4% on average.
Yeah.
And so there's almost a quadrupling of the potency of it, and what you find today, which is really, it's the difference between having like a beer. Most people are familiar with a 12-ounce can of beer. If you drank that, you know how you would feel. Well, if you filled that with 4 or 5 ounces of vodka and then drank it, you know how that would feel, right? That's
Yep.
the potency difference in the marijuana from the 60s and the marijuana of today. And so it's acting on the brain in much stronger, more potent ways. Delaying reaction time, there's danger on the roads.
Concentration,
Yeah.
you know, as Matt said, memory.
When I was in school, we didn't have any of that in high school, and marijuana never even came on the scene until I was a senior in college, and that's when it just started creeping in. So it's as far as the number of people consuming it was non-existent. Of course, everybody's drinking beer back then, but the point is that how it exponentially has grown, and as you're saying, it being 4 times more dangerous to
Potent, yeah.
Potent.
you know.
3 to 4 times more potent.
Well, wouldn't that be dangerous too?
Well,
Yeah, from a certain perspective, I think, yeah.
right.
It's interesting. I mean, and now, actually, how often do you run into people selling the marijuana to the youth?
That would be a great question for our narcotics officer. I don't know if I could really answer that very well. A lot of times what happens, we don't usually get the people that are selling it. Generally, because marijuana smells so potent, we can get it out of cars as far as, what they're going to smoke or maybe the baggie that they have for personal use. But it's not very often that we get the people that have it for distributing. So it does happen though, and some of my coworkers have made some good arrests of dealers, so to speak. And but it's not as common as the recreational users that we come across.
How many different ways are there to utilize or consume marijuana? For me, the only way I ever would know about consumption of marijuana is through smoking. But there's got to be a lot more ways that I have no clue of, and that's why I'm asking the question, because I think we got a whole audience out there of people that haven't got a clue, unless they would have gone into that little pipe shop we had in Forest Lake for a while. But other than that, I mean, I walked in there and saw all the pipes of different sorts, but I mean, I just assumed that was it.
Right. And
I don't know.
And actually, if a pipe that has never been used, or if it was used to just smoke tobacco, that's legal. It becomes drug paraphernalia if it was used to smoke an illegal drug, like, for example, marijuana. So typically it's smoked through a pipe or maybe a joint that's rolled with paper. But more commonly, we see them disguising their marijuana in the e-cigs. So
What?
yeah.
You've got to be kidding me.
So
E-cigs look a lot like this nowadays.
Oh, you're kidding.
No.
Really?
No, there's little burn units in the bottom, and they have to have a special ceramic plate with a lot more electricity, but you can smoke marijuana through like a pen-shaped thing. And it, yeah.
Yeah, they take all kinds of shapes and forms.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness.
You can get the oil, the marijuana oil out of the plant. There's different processes for doing that, but you can literally just eat the oil. You can put marijuana mix it into food product and eat it.
I know of brownies. Somebody told me that they can get brownies with that.
Yeah.
we've dealt with that
Yeah.
before.
Yeah.
They're having all kinds of problems with that in the states that have legalized marijuana because
The
young
potency.
children, toddlers, preschoolers are ingesting
The candies.
the cookies and the candies and the brownies and those sorts of things that
Really?
have marijuana in them. They've had and I'm not sure of the actual statistic, but a significant increase in ED visits for marijuana kind of overdoses with young children. How do they know the difference?
Well, they wouldn't know the
Yeah,
difference.
how do they
I
know
don't
that
know that
it's-
I would know the difference,
Yeah.
to be honest
No,
with
no.
you.
If I picked up a candy bar and it was a marijuana candy bar, I wouldn't know anything about how the potency worked. or
Yeah.
If you just take a little corner of it, it'll do this. If you eat a fourth of it, it'll do that. And I don't think most people do know that.
No, I wouldn't have a clue.
And some of those products are being deliberately marketed to kids. You look at some of the packaging, and it's clearly targeted to young people, children and teenagers. A great example of that would be Pot Tarts, not Pop Tarts, the ones that were, with the little jelly filling and the frosting on the top of
Yeah,
them,
right.
sugar
Ones that we
sprinkles.
ate,
The
like
ones that we
candy.
ate. Yeah, these are called Pot Tarts, but they look just like the box that Pop Tarts come in. And if you don't look at it carefully, you can't really differentiate between the two. And that's just one example of, the challenges we're facing in this day and age.
I don't know how the police can stay on top of all this stuff. I mean, there's always got to be somebody new coming up with a different way of doing it. I take my hat off to you for being able to try to enforce that.
Yeah, you should talk to the police in Colorado and Washington. They're having a really tough time.
Yes, they are.
Yeah.
I got a very good friend of mine that's a highway patrolman in Colorado, and I'll tell you what, he can't wait. He can tell you how many days he's got left till he retires.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't want any part of it anymore.
And the schools too. The schools are really struggling. They've had about a 37% increase in suspensions and expulsions that are drug related.
Yeah.
As a result of
there-
that access issue.
Is there something that, as a principal or as an officer, you can have somebody blow into or whatever to know if they're high on marijuana? Is there anything?
We just look for physical indicators. So if their eyes are really red and sometimes their eyes look very lazy. Sometimes we have them stick their tongue out. They can have green on their tongue. A lot of times they're pretty honest about it, especially if they don't have any left. They'll say, we smoked it all. But generally it comes along during the interactions that we have, as far as if we stop the vehicle or if we smelled marijuana in the vehicle right away. Depending on why we stopped the vehicle sometimes, if it was a moving violation or if they acted like they were intoxicated and they blew in the PBT and it said zeros, and then they said, well, I'm high or whatnot. So
They would call it one of the drug recognition officers from the department to come and do. There's different roadside tests that you do for.
Oh, you do have some roads. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, like the one for alcohol where you do the finger in front of the eye. Well, they're looking to see if your eye stays still out here for alcohol or if it shakes. But with marijuana and some other drugs, it's the shaking of the eyes on the way over to the side.
Really?
Yep.
Oh, parents, do you hear this? This is fascinating. I think it's wonderful.
Yeah.
So,
And distortion of time and reality. So they'll ask you to close your eyes, and then they'll say, open your eyes in 1 minute. And they might open them in 10 seconds, or they might open them in 2 minutes because their perception of time is off. And then once they get a certain number of those from the roadside tests, and there's a suspicion of it, then they'll go do a blood draw. And then they'll combine the results of the blood draw with the roadside tests to get a DUI conviction. And that's no alcohol at all. That's just drug related.
I'll be darned.
And I think, I would like to just mention that I think part of the confusion in the legalization argument is coming from the medicinal marijuana side of things, that there is some medicinal quality to marijuana, and that's true.
Yes, it is.
It is.
true.
It very much is, but it's not the kind of marijuana that you smoke. It's not the recreational kind of marijuana, the kind that's high in THC. It's high in a different chemical called CBD. it's not high in THC.
I never knew that either.
Yes. So that's part of part of what I think our culture largely doesn't understand. I mean, the folks that are pushing that pro-legalization movement, I think, try to skew that or blur that line a little bit. But it is a different substance, and it's true that there are some medicinal qualities.
There's a different chemical makeup. It's the same plant. It's the same. There's the same chemicals, but the chemicals are present at different levels in different strains of the plant, much like you would have with any different kind of corn plant, soybean plant, whatever. There's different levels of what Kathy was saying, the CBDs or the THC levels. There's still some THC in the medicinal marijuana that will be produced in Minnesota that they'll get the oil from, but it doesn't have the same level of THC as that you would see for recreational use for getting high, particularly.
Right.
There has to be some THC present in order for the chemical interaction to work right for some of the medicinal purposes. But
And you typically don't smoke a medicinal marijuana
Right.
either. It's taken in a different form. You'd have a very difficult time regulating a dosage in medicinal marijuana by smoking it.
Right.
So that just, common sense kind of tells you that, that wouldn't be the way that you would deliver the more medicinal side of that substance.
How addictive is tobacco in comparison to marijuana and the long-term effects? We've had a lot of, over the years as far as cancer and all this type of things. But let's move that out of the way. What is the addictive level for chew? What is to me, kind of marijuana and chewing tobacco and all that are all in the bundle them all up in the same bag, and it's similar for the end consumption. Because kids get high on chewing tobacco, and then ultimately they get sick because their stomach can't take it. But besides that, how would you classify the addiction level then for chew in comparison to marijuana? How would we compare it, to other, cigars? Certain cigars we can get some cigars out of Cuba that these things are so strong that, and you get used to them, holy bucket, they're incredible. But to me, how would where would the crossover? Is there a crossover?
the nicotine addiction is more powerful than THC addiction.
Seriously.
Yep. Yeah. With normal or semi-regular use of a tobacco product, within the first 2 to 3 months, you've got an addiction rate of around 1 out of 3 people.
It started out chewing.
Just in the starting phases, and then you move closer to 100% addiction rate after 3 to 4 months. So nicotine is as addictive as cocaine or heroin, just to give you a perspective.
I was going to get to those next.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Yeah.
That is hard to comprehend.
And the chemical components, the nasty chemicals that the companies put into the tobacco leaves are by and large the cancer-producing things when you're ingesting them into your lungs. I mean, there's the physical tar of the burning plant that marijuana has that too, tobacco has that, but tobacco causes cancer at a higher rate because of formaldehyde and ammonia and all that good stuff.
But I will say that marijuana has a 50 to 70% greater concentration of carcinogenic hydrocarbons than tobacco does. So
More tar.
yeah, it is probably, as bad, if not worse.
Yeah, because it's unfiltered.
Right.
There's no
Yep.
filter. You're just taking straight burning
Right.
hydrocarbons.
Yep.
Plant material.
Plant material. Yep.
What is hash? I hear that. It used to be a terminology years ago. Is that an old man's terminology for pot? What is hash?
No, it's the concentrated oil.
Yep. Of marijuana.
Yeah.
Yep.
Hash is the concentrated
Yeah,
oil.
yeah.
I never knew that.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you run across that very often anymore? Are those kind of addictions around? No?
We don't.
Yeah.
No,
And
it's a little more sophisticated. It's usually the teenagers aren't coming in contact with hash oil. That process is a little bit more sophisticated.
Yeah, yeah, and I guess I would turn to law enforcement to say, do they see it as, I don't hear about it, like I did years ago. And I don't know if you run into it much out in the community.
Yeah.
Right.
But it's there, it's there and it's available and.
What about cocaine? I know nothing about cocaine. What is there any redeeming value of anything good in cocaine?
No.
Besides that, it started out in Coca-Cola.
That's true, it did.
Yeah, no, there's no redeeming value in it.
No.
Now, do you run across that very often in town?
No, our narcotics task force deals with it quite a bit. It's not typically what we, it's not as common as meth or heroin. And I don't mean that by use. I don't know as far as use rates what's more common. I just know that generally we run across people that are using meth more than we run across people that are using cocaine.
And that would be more the adult population,
Yes.
not the
Yes.
youth.
Not youth.
No,
Not youth.
our
Youth.
use rates of those
1%.
substances,
Yes.
1-2%,
Yeah, at the most.
right in there somewhere.
Well, one of the areas we have not discussed, and that's gender. Now, does young men have more addictive qualities than young women? Is there a cross section of something that we can share? I don't know that either.
Well, I think it would be important to look at it substance by substance, but what I will say as kind of a general blanket statement is that use rates among the male population are higher with most substances, and their perception of risk and harm is lower, than females, which makes sense.
Well,
if they
I
perceive
agree
less
with you.
risk
It
and
does make
harm,
a
they're
lot of
going to be
sense.
they're going to be using
Yeah,
more.
I agree with you. It does make a lot of sense.
The other interesting thing is their perception of parental disapproval is a little bit lower than it is for girls, which is kind of an interesting statistic when we talk about the importance of parents. And one of the questions I would ask parents is, are you talking about this as much to your boys as you are to your girls? Are you making a point of, or is there some sort of rite of passage there, with your boys, that isn't necessarily with your girls? Are you more protective of your girls? What is happening there? I'm not sure I have the answer to that. I'm just speculating at this point in time, but males are perceiving, less parental disapproval. And so if I were to say something to parents at this point, I would just implore them to have those conversations as much with their boys as they are with their girls.
I would agree to that, and that's only in my own little community of 3 girls and a boy, and my daughters were always afraid that they'd disappoint me. But my son, he challenged me. So, and like I told, apples didn't fall far from trees, so I challenge my father too.
As far as addiction, addiction's an equal opportunity disease, and so it goes equally for girls and boys. It just depends on if there's more boys using, more boys will be addicted.
Right.
But it's an equal opportunity thing as far as addiction goes.
Do you find that there are certain drugs or certain chemicals that the more affluent your parents are, the more money you have to buy and participate in it? Do you think that is a fair statement to make?
No. Kids are very resourceful. When they don't have the money to buy the drugs they need, they will sell drugs to get the money to get the drugs they need. They don't need rich parents.
As we were talking about tobaccos, and we were going to transition from there, and we were going to start to go into household drugs. And I've been told that youth, the story I was told is kids like to be cool, so they're taking the Oxycontins and drugs like that, and then they take them out and give them to their friends and ultimately sell them to their friends. And that's beginning to be something of major consequence. Is there any validity to those type of in-home treatment drugs that are filtering its way to the streets for the youth?
And I would add not just the painkiller type medications, but also ADHD type drugs, the
What's that?
the Adderall, attention deficit disorder or attention deficit hyperactive disorder, drugs such as Adderall. Those are also an issue, I would say, when we talk about prescription drug use. And kids are taking those and sharing them with their friends as well. They have kind of a stimulant. They fall into kind of that stimulant category, and that's what they're using them for, is for to get that stimulant effect. So in addition to the painkillers that can be found in mom or dad's or grandpa's or grandma's or the aunts and uncles or neighbors' medicine cabinets, the ADHD drugs too are also a popular prescription drug that are being used. What I'll say about those
Are they addictive?
the Adderall?
Yeah.
Oh, sure.
When it's abused and not done
According to prescription?
according to prescription, because really what's happening is they crush them up and they will snort them, or they'll use them in a crushed up form instead of the time release. Instead of swallowing the whole tablet and allowing it to be released over time, the abuse happens when they're using the powdered form.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And it's an amphetamine, those drugs.
And I would say generally our use rates aren't real high here, but we are always keeping an eye on that. One of the kind of trending concerns for us is the increase in heroin use, which often starts with those prescription painkillers. They use or abuse prescription painkillers early on, and they start to not get the same effect from those over time.
Or they're more expensive.
Or they're more expensive or less accessible, so they transition to heroin then to get the same effect.
Where would somebody find heroin? I mean, I haven't got a clue. Where would you even find it?
Most of the heroin that we're seeing coming from Minneapolis generally is coming right out of Mexico. So people are carrying that over, and then the people are driving it in from Chicago and California. The people that are getting it in this area are typically driving just to Minneapolis to get it from these other places that they've been driven in from. Minnesota has a much higher potency with heroin compared to the rest of the country as well. And how they know that, basically, the FBI does studies. They'll have people go out onto the street and get heroin right off the street, and then they send it right to the FBI headquarters in Virginia, and they'll test it, and they test the potency of the heroin around the country. And time after time, Minnesota just has very, very high potency rates, which leads to more overdoses because people that use it don't realize how strong it is, and so they're abusing or just overdoing it.
It's a business model. I mean, the cartels have moved up the Midwest, up 35W. So if you go down to Missouri right now, you've got really low quality heroin at a high price because they've got the population addicted that they wanted to get addicted. They're hooked, so they'll pay a higher price for it, and they lower the quality. But when you go into a new market, you flood it with high quality product at a low price, so that people will have lots of access to it, become addicted to it, and then you move on.
What is that? How do you buy heroin? How do you buy this stuff? I mean, does it come in a bag? Is it, you buy it by the pound? How do you buy that stuff? I don't even know how you buy it.
Would you like to know how to get it?
I'm kind of curious because I mean,
I know a few people.
But I mean, you buy a big.
It's in powdered form. It's a
So it comes in a little baggie.
It's usually in a
Balloon is where we see the most of it.
yeah.
They store them in a little balloon. You know, it's not blown up, but usually if we see a balloon that's tied off in someone's wallet or in a pocket, that's generally could be heroin.
Seriously. And is it very expensive? I mean, are these drugs expensive? I mean,
Well, like an Oxy or a Vicodin can be $20 for a pill.
seriously.
Whereas you might be able to get twice the amount of hit or effect from $20 worth of heroin. But that's a general pricing right now.
Parents, you hearing this? This is something I have
Yeah.
no clue of. Man, oh man.
And we really don't see this being used by our youth. It's
Right.
usually the transition period, early 20s, maybe mid 20s for those that just never really were motivated to go anywhere else with life. They really were unsure, and that transition period to becoming an adult, they really failed. So, and started using. And sometimes when they get into heroin, it was maybe because they started off with a surgery or something where they were issued pain meds, and then they started to abuse those, and then it later went to heroin.
Right.
Yeah.
Some of that stuff is so foreign, I haven't got a clue about, what it is. But for the kids to, have a graduated possibility of starting out with one and continuing on and getting to the point that when they're 30 and 40 years old and they're taking all this terrible, rotten stuff and putting it in your body, I mean, that's,
That's why we're so passionate about prevention.
Yeah.
And that's also why we're so passionate about early intervention, because if kids do get into trouble, we need to intervene on their behalf, and parents need to intervene on their behalf while they still can. Once they hit 18 or they're older, it becomes much more difficult because they're adults. They're adults, and they're capable of making decisions and doing things on their own. And they continue to head down that path, and it can become a really awful place to be, as you enter your adulthood.
Another prevention tool for the parents that is to keep close track on your kids' internet history and usage, to find out what sites they're looking at and being at, and if there's any transactions or payments or FedEx or UPS type stuff, because a lot of these prescription meds are warehoused in Mexico and China, and there are illegal websites that pop up, and kids can purchase things through these websites. They'll get taken down a week later, but then they'll come up in another place. And so keep track of the internet histories and know what your kids are doing, because those things can come through the mail.
And that's the same with the synthetic drugs too.
I was just gonna. I was waiting for a break, and
yeah.
I want. What is a synthetic drug?
Well, they're a manufactured drug, so it's trying to create a substance to mask the effects of kind of an existing substance. Does that make sense?
So they take part A, part B, mix it together.
They're chemicals. They're not the natural chemicals found in that substance like the THC in marijuana. They're more the manufactured chemicals.
Yeah, they're modified versions of the original chemicals. Slightly different chemical signatures. Like, did you ever have chemistry in high school? And
We had.
remember it?
Yeah, I remember high school. I can remember those days.
There's those little Lewis structures where you see like the thing with the little thing. Well, it'll be a shape just like the original chemical, but then there'll be a little offshoot and something different on it. And it acts on your body somewhat the same as the original, but you have different side effects.
And sometimes those side effects are enough to put you into the emergency department at the hospital.
Or you die.
At worst,
Yeah.
you die. And kids don't necessarily understand that. They don't understand, the impact of that. They think it, maybe as benign as a comparable substance, but we just don't know, what's in those substances completely.
Yeah.
And that's pretty scary.
Yeah, so a synthetic is just like a liquid that gets sprayed. It's this manufactured chemical that gets sprayed on some regular plant material that's dried up and can be sold or packaged as incense. The kids use it, can smoke it just like marijuana and have a similar high as marijuana, but with some really bad side effects that can be harmful to them.
Uncontrollable side effects.
Yeah, shaking, nausea, vomiting, high blood pressure, cardiac arrest.
Respiratory
Yeah.
arrest. And the manufacturers are just masters at kind of hiding what, I mean, there's one in particular called bath salts, and if you look at that on the internet, I mean, when you think of bath salts, you think of like Epsom salts, for example, that you'd soak, a sore ankle in or a sore foot in. And they do that specifically to kind of keep them off the radar, the FDA radar or the radar of law enforcement. And it seems like every time we kind of get a handle on some of this stuff, something new pops up, and it takes a while to kind of catch up with it.
Wow.
So,
It's amazing.
yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what, we are out of time. This has been extremely interesting for myself. I'm going to tell you that right now. And public, I certainly hope that you got as much out of this as I have. With that being said, I'd like each one of you to give a closing comment and talk to the camera. This is your time, and you tell the parents this is exactly what you would like them to know.
Sure. A lot of this can be kind of scary when you hear this talked about. If you ever are concerned that you know of a youth that is experimenting with chemicals, or you think might need some help, or you want some assistance in figuring things out, feel free to call the Youth Service Bureau. I'll even give you the number. It's 651-464-3685, and ask for Matt. That's part of our job, is to field those phone calls and then to get you to the right place for your question to be answered, and so you can use us as a resource. So no need to be scared and not know what to do. You kind of have a homegrown resource available to you. So that would be the message I would want to leave people, is that you're not alone in your prevention efforts with your kids.
I just want to thank the parents in our community for keeping our kids safe, and really encourage them to be in their business and really just ask a lot of questions about the people that they're hanging with, and talk about the things that they know. I've always thought that knowledge is power, so we want to teach them everything we know so that they can make good choices.
I would say prevention is key, and that most kids are making really very good choices, and we're really proud of that fact. And we have an incredible team of individuals in this community, professionals, all the way down to parents and youth that are working shoulder to shoulder to keep this community safe and healthy for its young people. I would echo what Detective Laval said about monitoring the whereabouts of your kids and their behaviors and the things that they're doing. And I would echo Matt Howard's sentiments of, don't be afraid to ask for help. If you need it, it's there. And don't hesitate to get involved with our efforts as parents. Attend some of our meetings, attend some of our events. We welcome you, and we need you as we are trying to get this work done and keep your kids healthy and safe. In concluding, I can't remember having a better group and a more diverse group to be able to discuss what I would call a very interesting subject, but yet it's one of those that nobody hardly ever talks about. Either they get caught, either you catch them, or you get to them at a meeting. So one way or the other, they're But the point is that this type of information and getting it to the parents so that they know they've got some other options and they can make these phone calls. I mean,
I always hear, well, then I'm going to ask a dumb question. There's no such thing as a dumb question. The only thing is that if you don't ask it, you're never going to know, and people love to share. And with that being said, I want to thank all of you for viewing us. I hope that you get out of this as much as we put into it and want you to be aware of. And once again, thank you for tuning in on Hot Topics, and your host, Greg Ochs, and have a lovely evening.